In part two of our exit interview series from the Carolina Hurricanes, we get to hear from Jaccob Slavin, Brent Burns, and Jordan Staal on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I am your host, Zach Martin. I am the Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers. I also write over at the Calder Times, which covers everything of the American Hockey League. I am also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Got a very exciting episode for you today on a Tuesday edition of the show. We get to go over more of the exit interviews from this past weekend, and this is part two of the Saturdays edition of the groups, which features Jaccob Slavin, Brent Burns, and Jordan Staal. Before we get into all of that and so much more, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So like I said, for today's show, we're going over more of Saturday's round of interviews and stuff like that. I know for Monday's edition, we went over Jake Gensel, Brady Shea, and Brett Pesce. And for today's episode, we're going to be doing Jaccob Slavin, Brent Burns, and Jordan Staal. And I know on Monday, there was that end-of-season press conference with Rod Brind'amour and Don Waddell, and I'm actually going to move that to Friday's show because I know we wanted to get all the interviews and stuff done from the players this week. And I know we were supposed to do a mailbag at the end of the week, but with the press conference happening on Monday and there was a lot of stuff to go over, I'm kind of restructuring the week of the schedule. We're going to do a lot of more of the press conference from Monday of Don Waddell and Rod Brind'amour on Friday's show. So that's kind of the change that we're going to be doing for the week. So just want to give everyone a heads up. If you were expecting a mailbag on Friday, that's going to be pushed back to the week after that because I definitely want to jump into the Brind'amour and Waddell press conference at the end of the week. But for today, for this episode on Tuesday, we are, like I said, Slavin, Burns, and Jordan Staal. We're actually going to start with the assistant captain himself, Jaccob Slavin. And he had some things to talk about, meeting with the media on Saturday, going over their exit interviews at PNC Arena. And one of the questions that, was asked of him, and, one that kind of really stood out more than anything else, the fact that with the team, coming up short, having great regular seasons, not, getting some deep playoff runs, but not enough to where you're seeing, wins in the Eastern Conference Final now twice, and also not really making the Stanley Cup Final, which is the end goal and stuff like that. And Jaccob Slavin even admitted that this postseason was probably the most frustrating exit for the team as a whole. And Slavin said to the media, look at the team we had this year, especially. We had all the pieces to get over that hump. Look at the games we lost. Every game was a one-goal game again. It's frustrating to lose games in overtime or in the last period. It's frustrating in the regard that we are right there year after year, but you never get over that hump. It's frustrating. This was definitely the year if we were going to do it. Out of all the years that we've had, it's frustrating. And Jaccob is exactly right. It is definitely the most frustrating one because you look at last year, yes, it was a sweep, but it was a close sweep. It's not one of those ones where, you're getting blown out 5-2 in a game, or what we saw in the Boston Bruins, Florida Panthers series where, yes, it went 6, but it's like 2-3 of those games were, 5-1, 6-1, 6-2. So those weren't really tight games. Yeah, it went longer, but those weren't really close for the most part. If you look at the series with the Rangers for the Hurricanes, every game was decided by a goal. And the only one that kind of got out of reach was the Hurricanes 4-1 win in Game 5 to force a Game 6. And yes, Carolina did lose 5-3 in Game 6, but the last goal was an empty netter. So if you really want to look at it, it was 4-3 in general. But yeah, pretty much every game for the Hurricanes in this series against the Rangers were all pretty much one-goal games, and that's kind of what you saw last year against the Panthers, where quadruple overtime in game 1. You had another overtime, I think it was game 2, and then overtime in game 4, where all those goals were, like I said, one goal because most of that series was in overtime. But I think what Jaccob Slavin is saying, which is very true, that this was probably the most frustrating one, because you go back to the trade deadline. You go out and get Jay Gensel. You go out and get Evgeny Kuznetsov. Kuznetsov was a low-risk, high-reward. Like, you see what you can get with that one. But with Jay Gensel, it was the Hurricanes went against their usual MO of getting rentals. Like, the Hurricanes aren't a team to go and get a rental player. Like you saw in last year's trade deadline, they go out and get Jesse Puljujarvi. He was mainly for a depth piece. Unfortunately, Andrei Svechnikov gets hurt. He's kind of thrown into the lineup, and he's trying to figure it out on the fly and get back to what he can do. And they also get Shane Gostisbehere, who was there to help out the power play, which for the most part, the power play did get better last year when they got Shane Gostisbehere, but it wasn't. And at that time, too, Andrei Svechnikov was healthy. He unfortunately gets hurt and misses the entire playoffs, and now you're kind of like, well, what do we do? Svech is out. Weren't really planning on him being out, and that's kind of what hindered the team, in the last playoffs, was the fact that you didn't have Andrei Svechnikov. This postseason, you go all in. You go get Evgeny Kuznetsov. You go get Jake Gensel. Svech is healthy, and you're about ready to go into the playoffs, and then a guy who's been in the lineup for the last couple of years, and Jesper Fast, he gets hurt in the last game, hurts his neck. He's in a neck brace. So that stinks. You lose him. And then you're talking game 2 of the Islanders series, and, one of your horses that you've had pretty much their entire career since 2015 and 16 in Brett Pesce, he's your second pair D-man, and he breaks his fibula by his ankle in game 2 against the Islanders, and he's out for the rest of that series. And he's out for the entire series against the Rangers, and there's potentially of him coming back. So you lose one of your key top 4 defensemen and one of your depth guys who, doesn't score a lot, but he does enough to make it where your bottom 6 is really good, and now you're having to rely on, trying to figure out how to make some lines work and stuff like that when you already have 2 of your regular guys out, even before the playoffs and while the playoffs are going. And, yeah, it's definitely frustrating because the fact that you go through the Islander series, you go win that series in 5, you get it done on home ice, you come into round 2 against the Rangers, the President's Trophy winners, Metro Division winners, and stuff like that, and you were hoping, you're curious to see how that's going to go, because you got the 2 best teams in the Metro, probably the 2 best teams on paper that were favored to go win the Cup, and all of a sudden you're down 3-0. But every game was a 1-goal game. Just, certain bounces didn't go your way. Power play kind of went cold, unfortunately, at the wrong time. It's just one of those things where the Rangers are getting a lot of bounces that went their way. It didn't really work out for the Canes, but what can you do? Welcome to the playoffs and welcome to hockey. And, fortunately for the Hurricanes, they didn't give up. They didn't roll over. I've talked about in previous episodes, here on the show, and that's, they didn't roll over. They didn't die. They just okay, well, they threw their hands up and just quit. No, they kept fighting through it. And, what did I say? Plus 1% every day, want to know every game day, and that's what they did. And you fought back into it. Okay, now you start getting that hope. You start getting the momentum. And, I know Shane Willis and Mike Maniscalco both said on Canes Cast, momentum is good for the game. It doesn't carry for game to game, but I don't know. Sometimes you kind of feel like the momentum does carry, because you see how the Hurricanes won game 4. Okay, cool. You go into game 5. Okay, did it pretty impressively. Wins 4-1. You go into game 6. Okay, all of a sudden now you're up 3-1 going into the last period. You're carrying a lot of momentum. Now you're putting pressure on the Rangers, and unfortunately, it just kind of, the luck ran out, the magic ran out in the 3rd period, and there you go. But yeah, it's definitely frustrating when you had a better chance of going all in. You got the guy that was good in the playoffs in Jake Gensel, 67 points in 69 games, for his career, 34 goals. 25 points in 17 games in the regular season, 9 points in 11 games for the playoffs. You kind of feel like, okay, we have a bona fide playoff guy in Jake Gensel. Now he's with Sebastian Aho and Andrei Svechnikov. All 3 of those guys are going. Seth Jarvis is leading the way in the goal category with 5. Brady Shea's playing unbelievable with a lot of assists and what he's doing. Freddie Anderson, for the most part, had a great playoffs. Kind of got shaky in the second round, but what can you do? And it's one of those things where it's just there were some key things that didn't really go the Hurricanes' way. Like I said, the power play was okay in the first round. Second round kind of disappeared on them a little bit. Certain bounces went the Rangers' way that the Hurricanes couldn't really capitalize on. The Hurricanes are a high volume shooting team. You saw the high value shooting, but they were able to score. They scored goals, but it wasn't at the right times, or just kind of fell short. With the Rangers, they didn't shoot a lot, but they capitalized on their opportunities, so they went for more of the quality over quantity, which you see with the Hurricanes. So I could definitely see what Jaccob is saying. It is a very frustrating series where you knew going into it you had a chance, but you put yourself in a hole. You kind of grind back. You were up 3-1 going into the last period, and unfortunately, it just kind of gets away from you, and now you're out of the playoffs again a lot sooner than you thought you were going to be. But you got to give the Hurricanes credit. They didn't quit. They kept fighting, but unfortunately, it's another exit where you're not making a conference final, you're not making a Stanley Cup final, and you're not getting that ultimate goal. And this was the year where, like I said, you don't see the Hurricanes go for rentals. They went for the rental. They traded Michael Bunting, who still has more years on his contract now in Pittsburgh. Vasily Ponomarev is now in Pittsburgh as well, and some other prospects. And now it's like, okay, well, what's the Hurricanes going to do with Ty Smith? They got a draft pick out of it too, but like now they have to go and try signing Jake Gensel. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the Hurricanes do this offseason. But you could tell that the Hurricanes went all in. They wanted to push the chips in and go for it this year. And it looked like they were going to. It's just, unfortunately, things didn't really go their way. So it's definitely more. If you ask me which series of this one against the Rangers or the Florida series, I would say it's more frustrating for this series because you had most of your roster healthy. Unfortunately, you lost Foch. You lose Pesce in the first round, but you get Kuznetsov, who scored 4 goals in the playoffs for you. You get Jake Gensel at 9 points. Seth Jarvis is playing well. Andrei Svechnikov is healthy. It's just, unfortunately, it didn't go your way, and some aspects kind of fell short where you were kind of hoping that you could bank on, with the power play being the second best in the regular season and all that stuff. But unfortunately, that's hockey, and that's the playoffs. It's a lot harder to go win the Stanley Cup. And that's why it's the hardest trophy to win. And, it's a whole other beast when you're talking postseason hockey. But that was kind of the main thing from Jaccob Slavin, which I thought was very, very interesting to cover. We are going to now transition over to the captain of the team, and that is Jordan Staal. And we'll do that here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So like I said at the end of segment 1, we're going to start transitioning from the assistant captain and Jordan Staal to Jaccob Slavin, and moving on to the captain is Jordan Staal. So many J names and all that stuff. But yes, we're going to go into now talking about what Jordan Staal said to the meeting. He was one of the first players that were on the mic for Saturday's exit interviews with the media. And they asked him, like, the fact that it was still a fresh wound at the time, and it still kind of is for a lot of the guys too. And the fact that they asked Jordan Staal about just the overall with the team and just the aspect of what how the playoffs went. And he even said, like, he feels like the current group could get the job done if they run it back next year. And he even said too, we've built some great teams here and we have come up short. It's been frustrating. A few players here and there, things could look different. Blowing it all up or changing everything is kind of a knee-jerk reaction, I think. We've got a great core here with some really good players that could be good for a long time. And the captain's right. I mean, you look at the team on paper, yes, you would love to see the team run it back. We saw it in the press conference on Monday with Don Waddell and Rod Brind'amour, which I'll go into a lot more for Friday's show, but just kind of pick off from what Don and Rod were saying and, put in the context of what Jordan Stahl's saying is they would love to keep the whole team together. They want to run it back with the whole group. But like Don Waddell said, there's unfortunately a thing called the salary cap that kind of hinders you from doing that. And, guys like Brachet wants to get paid. He wants a fair deal. Also, too, you're looking at Brett Pesce, who wants to get a pay raise. you got to give a pay raise to also Jalen Chatfield, Steph Nason. There's a lot of guys who are due for their contracts. Jordan Martinook as well. Jordan Martinook had a good season. He's going to want a contract as well. And you even look at, restricted free agents. Yes, you can still figure out, contracts with those guys like Martin Nietzsche, Seth Jarvis, and even Jack Drury. But the thing is, some guys are going to need some pay raises. And while the cap does go up for next season, I don't think there's enough room in the cap space to where it's going up that you can go and be like, okay, we'll give this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy all pay raises. And then hopefully he fits under the cap, because you still have to figure out, Jake Gensel as well. He's going to want some money. Yeah, he made $6 million last year, but, he's a guy who could make $8 to $9 million. Brady Shea might look at 6. Brett Pesci might look at 5. Jordan Martinook, he's going to go and he's going to want a contract too. Steph Nason was making under $100,000. He could be looking at $1.5 million, $2 million, or even more. Same thing for Jalen Chatfield. He's making less than $1 million. He could be looking for a pay raise around $2-3 million possibly. And you got your RFAs. And then even next offseason, you still got to worry about Jaccob Slavin. But the thing with Slavin is the Hurricanes could potentially extend him this year if they want to get it over and done with. And you're talking one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league who's that elite. You got a lot of things to think about. And of course, you also got, Alexander Nikishin possibly coming from the KHL either this year, because Don Waddell and the Hurricanes are open to the possibility of trying to get him here now, unless it's in 2025. So you got him to worry about. You got all the prospects you got coming up too. Jackson, Blake, Bradley, Nadeau. Yeah, they got their contracts taken care of, but if you bring them up, you got to figure them out in their deals as well. So that's just a tough thing to worry about. And, there's a lot of contracts to figure out, and where do you go from there, and how you try to bring some guys back. Like what Don said, you would love to bring the entire team back, but there's a salary cap, and a lot of guys are going to be looking at pay raises because of how good they've been over the last couple of years, especially during the 2023-24 season, and how they won the playoffs too. So it's going to be tougher to bring in the entire team back. So now you're kind of having to figure out, okay, what guys are you keeping? What guys possibly might be leaving, and who really knows right now what it looks like. Because you have a few guys under contract next season, but you still have a plethora of other dudes who are going to need to figure out their contracts. And one guy we didn't even mention is Teuvo Teravainen. Teuvo's up for a contract too, so you're looking at a bunch of guys in your forward core, and you're looking at your entire second D pair that's going to need to get paid as well. What do you do from there? Where do you go from there? And that's the whole thing. So I understand what Jordan Staal said it perfectly. They have the core to get it done, and they want to try to bring that core back and try to keep all this, the supportive pieces around the team. A lot of your bottom six guys. Looking at your defense too. It's just, how do you do it? How do you try to navigate the aspect of, you want to keep guys like Steph Nason around, bottom six guy, a great net foot presence, a guy who you can put in your power play and do the job that he does. You're looking at, Teuvo Teravainen. He's been with the team for a long time. What do you do with him where he's played top six, bottom six, middle nine? He's pretty much been everywhere for the Hurricanes. You look at Martin Nietzsche, who's up again for an RFA contract. What do you do with him? Because, there could be some disgruntled feelings there somewhere. Rumors, of course, but who really knows? You're looking at Seth Jarvis, who had a career year while he had a torn rotator cuff and a torn labrum, still scored 33 goals, still at 67 points, 13 power play goals. Oh, and he led the team in the playoffs with goals too. You got to figure out what you're going to do with his contract. Do you give him a bridge? Do you give him an 8-year deal? It's tough. It's a tough decision, and I don't envy Don Waddell or the front office in general, because how do you figure out how to bring these guys back and make sure everyone gets paid fairly, but also having enough flexibility to have a team that's cohesive and that could be competitive for next season? Because you do want to run it back, but how do you fit within the parameters of what the NHL wants you to do in terms of a cap space? And that's the tough thing to do. Does everyone want to come back at a decent price that makes it work for the whole team to run it back? Could you pull what Boston Bruins have done, where Patrice Bergeron, Brad Marchand, Zdeno Chara, Milan Lucic? You can run down the entire list of the Boston Bruins over the last decade or more that made it work with the contract situation they have. Can you pull off the same thing in Carolina? Who really knows? The guys love it here. They love being here. They love being around the team. Do you take the happiness route of I want to be paid fairly, but I want to make sure that I'm here in Carolina with this team? And that's the thing you kind of have to think about is, will it work? Will these guys be like, yeah, I want long-term stability for my family. I want to do right for them. I want to get paid fairly. Is that here in Carolina? And are you willing to make that, maybe a little bit of a sacrifice, a certain amount of dollars that you're looking for to stay here and run it back with a team that could get, who has the potential in the core to get over the hump? And that's the real debate of how do you make that work, and will it work? Like I said, I don't think you're like what Jordan Staal said. You don't want to have a full change because that's just a knee-jerk reaction of, oh, we got to blow the team up. We got to do this and that. We got to move all these guys around and stuff like that. No, it's just relax, take a break, look at what works, what guys you think could stay, and you go after the guys that are that are 100% in to stay. And then if you can try to convince other guys to stay or make it work to where the surrounding cast can stay too, and you make it work, then there's a possibility. But who really knows? And I guess we'll see when we get, we are well over a month and a half away from free agency, because free agency starts July 1st, and that's also the re-sign phase too. So there's, a lot of talks over the next few weeks to see, what players want, what do the agents want, what does the team want, and how they can figure all that stuff out. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what the team is going to look like here, in the next few months before we get the training camp later this fall. And then, of course, we got the home opener in October. And what do you see when free agency hits in July? Who really knows? It'll be very, very interesting to see like that. But I agree with Jordan, though. There's a good core in this team. There's a great young core. And if you bring some of the guys back who are the younger guys who are in RFAs, sign them up, lock them up, and then, you try to go get the guys who are UFAs and bring most of them back if you can, and then see what you can do free agency. I think the Hurricanes can find a way to make another competitive run next year to go for the Metro, to go for another deep playoff run for their 7th straight playoff appearance. And who knows? Eastern Conference Finals again. But, that's a long ways away. But you can tell that, the Hurricanes are going to do their due diligence and they're going to make it work to make sure that they can stay competitive again next year, because you're in a perfect window. Just keep going and run it with the core, and then find the pieces that will help you get over the hump and go win the Stanley Cup. And that's kind of the main thing. So that will wrap up what we're going to talk about with Jordan Staal. But we got one more guy we need to take a look at, and it is the mountain man himself, Brent Burns. And we'll do that here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. And now we're going to finish up on our last player that we want to keep a focus on, and that is the man himself, that is Brent Burns. And looking back that how the team was overall, and the fact that, Brent Burns had a really long interview with the media, almost close to 15 minutes, talking about his career, talking about, the difficult endings of the season and stuff like that. And, Brent Burns is someone who's really trying to chase for a cup, and, he really wants one. He's one of those guys where you're looking at, like, at one point you had, Ray Bourque, you've had Timo Timonen. There's a bunch of guys who really wanted to go and win a cup, and it took them a long time to do it. And Brent Burns is kind of in that area of like a Joe Pavelski, where it's like they're trying to win one. And that's what he's trying to do here in Carolina. He wants to win a cup, and he knows he's getting closer to the end of his career, where it's like the window's getting a lot tighter for him to do it. And just talk about that in general is Brent Burns talked about the difficult end of the season, where he goes, you have to accept it and use it for next year's motivation. Whether you're young or old, it's tough. It's hard to realize that there's not always a chance at winning the Stanley Cup. You have to really embrace the chance at it that we did. We had such an unbelievable group from the staff down. You have to enjoy that and feel the hurt when it doesn't happen. And that's a great way to look at it if you're Brent Burns, and looking at if you're for the younger guys or the older guys, embrace that. It's one team wins the Stanley Cup, 31 other teams don't, and you have to embrace that it wasn't your year. You had the chance to do it. You had a great group. You finished 3 points back of the President's Trophy winners. You get your first run down. You win the first round in 5 games. You go down 0-3, but you don't quit. You fight back. You force a game 6 against one of the best teams in the league. Yeah, it didn't work out the way you wanted to. It stinks. It's you want to go win the Stanley Cup, but at the end of the day, one team wins it. And unfortunately, the Hurricanes weren't that team. And you use that for next year. And I know it's a hard thing for the fans to hear. I get it too. It's like, okay, yes, it stinks you didn't win the cup. You use it for motivation and stuff like that. And you want the team to win. You want them to win almost every year, but it's also like, it's tough. And I even said it earlier in the second segment. It is the hardest trophy to win in all of sports. Because you look at the regular season, you play 82 games, and then you have to go and try to win 16 games in the postseason. But you're talking 4 rounds of 7. That's a lot of hockey. And that's even after you're talking about an 82-game regular season. It's tough. It's a tough trophy to win, and that's why it's the most prestigious, in my opinion, of all the major sports. The fact that it's the greatest trophy to win, the hardest trophy to win, but it also gives you the best playoffs, I think. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's just one team wins it all, and you have to find the playoff goals. You got to find, there's luck, there's skill, there's so much that goes into the playoffs. And sometimes your numbers call it, and the hockey gods are looking on you, and there's times where it's like, you kind of had a chance, and unfortunately, like what Forrest Gump says, life's like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. And unfortunately, the chocolate piece that the Carolina Hurricanes picked wasn't the one that said, here's your Stanley Cup. And that's why you kind of have to look at it as, you know what? Yeah, that wasn't the right piece of chocolate this season, but maybe, maybe next year, maybe you might find that right piece of chocolate in the box and get you a Stanley Cup. It's all about just putting your hand in there. You keep just finding that chance and just keep at it. And I think that's kind of the embrace that you have to look at for the Hurricanes is, yeah, it didn't work out, but, you're not on the outside looking in. And what Rod Brind'amour said on the press conference Monday, which, like I said, we'll go over more of that later in the week, but Rod Brind'amour said it perfectly. We're knocking on the door. The last couple seasons, you're knocking on the door. You'd rather be there, at least knocking on that door, rather than 2 houses down the road, which what the Hurricanes were during the dark ages. Outside looking in. Let's say you're not even 2 houses down. You're probably outside of the gated community that is the playoffs. Like, imagine the playoffs are a gated community, and like, okay, cool, you made it. You made the playoffs. Welcome into your new house. Here's your little 16-team neighborhood, and in the center is the Stanley Cup. And that's where you're at. And you could be on the outside of that gate looking in as a non-playoff team, and you're looking inside going, man, I wish I was in there right now knocking on the mansion that holds the Stanley Cup. Yeah, Stanley Cup's not even in the middle of the road. It's in the mansion at the end of the road, and everyone else is in the neighborhood wanting to get to that mansion. And there's so many obstacles you have to get there. You would rather be in that neighborhood trying to get to that mansion where the cup is, rather than being outside of the gated community with the teams who didn't make it. And Rod said it perfectly. You're knocking right there on the door. Eventually, it's going to open for you, and the Hurricanes are going to win the cup. And the fact of what Brent Burns said, yeah, you have to embrace it. He said it perfectly. You have to really embrace the chance at it that they did. And the fact that you had an unbelievable group from the staff down, you have to enjoy that and feel the hurt when it does happen. The fact that you have to accept it and use it for a motivation next year, no matter how old you are, how long you've been in the league and stuff like that. Brent Burns said it perfectly. And for me, that's how it is. You look at what Brod said. Knock on the door. Eventually it's going to open, and eventually they're going to be like, welcome. Here's the Stanley Cup. Rather be there knocking on the door in the neighborhood than being outside in the gate, trying to ask the guards to get in and get past that fence. But unfortunately, it just didn't work out for the Hurricanes this year, and hopefully, next year, we'll see how the offseason goes, see how the draft goes in free agency and the re-sign phase, and then before you know it's October, and we're on to another 82-game season, and hopefully try and get back in that community for another chance at Lord Stanley. But that will wrap up today's episode for Locked On Hurricanes. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at OneTrueZach on X. You can also follow the podcast at LO_Hurricanes. If you click the link tree in my bio on X, you can find out where to find all my articles at the Hockey Writers. Did a lot of articles over the past week. I think we did like 4 or 5 in the last week. So make sure you go check all of those out, along with the free newsletter that's going to come out today as well. Got some premium content that's going to be coming out very soon as well. And going to start focusing a lot more on the draft over the next couple weeks and stuff like that. If you want to follow anything on my American Hockey League stuff that I do, go check out the Calder Times. There's a link there to find my articles talking AHL. If you want to check out the Surgecast, this is my other Carolina Hurricanes podcast. There is a link for the podcast in the YouTube version of that channel. And if you want to check out where you listen to this, you can listen to the audio format. There is a link for the podcast formats. And if you leave a 5-star rating, and if you leave a review for that 5-star rating, I might just rate on the show, and it'll help me grow the show out and get out more to Carolina Hurricanes fans so they become everydayers just like you. Also, with the there's also a link to the YouTube side of things. And if you go to subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss an episode, and hit the thumbs up button, I really, really appreciate that as well. And also share it with other Hurricanes fans. So like I said, that way we can start, getting closer to 1,000 subscribers, because that's the goal we're on right now, is to get to 1,000. Because right now we're over 860. We're ever so closer to get to that 1,000 goal. And if we do, I might just do something special for you guys. So make sure to do all that. Thank you for the support as always. Hope everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.